General Hospital will reveal Josslyn stepped into the world of the WSB with an unshakable belief that she could take control of her fate, that she could seek justice on her own terms. She had convinced herself that joining the agency would give her the power to right the wrongs she had suffered, to ensure that no one she loved would ever be harmed again. But she had been naive. She never anticipated that this path would strip her of her own identity, turning her into something she had never aspired to be, a highly trained assassin, executing orders without question, erasing lives in the name of national security. She had been a college student with dreams and ambitions of her own, yet those dreams had been left behind in the grueling days of WSB training. The punishing regimens, the relentless drills, the unending psychological conditioning, all of it had reshaped her into a deadly weapon. Her hands, once unsteady, had become precise. Her emotions, once uncontrollable, had been forced into submission. She had mastered her craft, proved herself in impossible missions, and ascended through the ranks as one of WSB's most valuable snipers. But all of it had led to this moment, the mission that shattered her carefully constructed illusions. The order came down without hesitation, without any regard for what it meant to her personally. Josslyn was tasked with eliminating Jason. A direct kill. No witnesses. No traces left behind. It was just another mission, another name on a file, another loose end to tie up. But to Josslyn, it was something far more devastating. She had never imagined this day would come. Jason was not just a legend in the underworld, he was her protector once. He had stood by her family through every storm, a silent guardian who had sacrificed more than she could ever comprehend. He had been part of her childhood, a figure of unwavering loyalty in a world that was constantly shifting beneath her feet. And now, she was expected to erase him. But the WSB did not care about personal history, nor did they tolerate hesitation. Orders were absolute, and her duty was clear. The cruelest part of it all was that the one who had set this twisted game in motion was none other than Jack Brennan, the man who had manipulated her into joining the agency in the first place. He had backed her into a corner, used his influence to conceal her past actions, and ensured that she remained indebted to the WSB. It was Brennan who had hidden the truth about her execution of Cyrus, who had turned her act of vengeance into leverage. And now, he no longer needed to hide behind pretense. She was part of the machine, and there was no escape. Josslyn knew she had no choice. To refuse was to sign her own death warrant. To question was to invite scrutiny, and scrutiny in an organization like the WSB was fatal. Her survival depended on her ability to suppress everything she felt and do what she had been trained to do. And yet, for the first time since she had joined the agency, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Fear. Not for herself, but for what she was becoming. The mission was handed down with cold, clinical precision, void of hesitation, devoid of mercy. There were no explanations, no room for doubt, only a direct order: eliminate Jason. It had to be done in absolute secrecy, leaving no evidence, no trace of her involvement. Josslyn knew this mission would define her, that once she crossed this line, there would be no turning back. But there was no room for refusal, no space for conscience within the walls of the WSB. She had trained for this, had been shaped into a weapon capable of executing such orders without question. And yet, as she positioned herself in the shadows, lining up her shot, she realized she had never felt more human. The night air was eerily still, thick with an unnatural silence. Hidden in her vantage point, Josslyn adjusted her scope, steadying her breath despite the chaos raging inside her. Jason stood below, unaware of the fate looming over him. He moved with the ease of someone who had spent his entire life evading danger, but this time, there would be no warning, no chance to fight back. He had always been the protector, the unbreakable force that stood between those he cared for and the inevitable threats that came their way. But tonight, he was defenseless, because he never would have expected her. Her heartbeat pounded violently against her ribs, her hands cold against the grip of the rifle. It was just one shot. One squeeze of the trigger, and it would all be over. She had done this before, many times. She had been trained to detach, to view her targets as nothing more than assignments, obstacles to be removed. But this was different. This was Josslyn. Seconds stretched into eternity as her finger hovered over the trigger. She tried to suppress the war waging inside her, but the voices in her head screamed against it. She didn't want to do this. She couldn't. But there was no choice. Then, she pulled the trigger. The shot echoed into the night, a sharp and unforgiving sound that shattered the silence. A muffled gasp, a staggering step, and then he fell. His body hit the ground with finality, and in that instant, the world seemed to stop. The weight of what she had done crashed over her, suffocating her beneath a tidal wave of regret. Josslyn Morgan was dead. And Josslyn Jax was no longer the girl she used to be. The news of Josslyn's death sent shockwaves through Port Charles. Carly refused to believe it at first. It wasn't possible. Josslyn had survived too much, had defied death too many times to be gone just like that. But the undeniable truth tore through her like a knife. He was really gone. The grief came in waves, crashing over her in violent bursts of anguish and rage. The pain was unbearable, but more than anything, she felt fury that someone had taken him from her, that someone had dared to end the life of the one person who had never abandoned her. Sonny was no different. The loss of Josslyn left a void, an open wound that refused to close. But he wouldn't allow himself to drown in grief. Instead, he channeled it into action. Someone had done this. Someone had planned it, executed it, and thought they could get away with it. He and Carly would find out who. They would hunt them down, and when they did, there would be no mercy. But as they followed the breadcrumbs left behind, the truth became more elusive. Every lead they uncovered seemed to be wrapped in deception, every trail led them further into the shadows of something far darker than they had anticipated. They were chasing ghosts, running in circles within a web of lies spun by an organization far more powerful than they had realized. And somewhere, hidden within that darkness, was Josslyn, haunted, broken, and trapped in the very world she had sworn she could control. She had erased every trace of her crime, destroyed every piece of evidence, but no matter how carefully she covered her tracks, there was one thing she could never erase. The blood on her hands. Meanwhile, Josslyn felt herself unraveling, losing pieces of her identity with every breath she took. The transformation had begun the moment she pulled the trigger, but now, it consumed her. When she had killed Cyrus, she had clung to the belief that she was serving justice, that she was avenging Dex, that she was eliminating a threat that deserved to be erased. It had been her choice, her decision, and she had convinced herself that it was the right one. But killing Josslyn was something else entirely. There was no justice in this. No sense of moral righteousness, no justification she could cling to. This wasn't an act of vengeance. It was murder, a ruthless execution orchestrated by the very people she had entrusted with her future. And now, no amount of training, no level of detachment could numb the weight of what she had done. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Carly falling to her knees in anguish, saw the pain and devastation in her mother's eyes. Carly had lost so much already, Sonny, Morgan, and now Josslyn. But this time, the heartbreak was different, sharper, because Josslyn had always been the one constant in her life. He had been the unshakable pillar Carly could always lean on, the silent protector who had never let her down. And now, he was gone. Josslyn imagined the moment Carly had to tell Danny and Jake that their father wasn't coming home. She pictured the disbelief, the denial, and then the inevitable tears, the broken sobs of two boys who had lost the man who had always shielded them from the darkness of the world. She had been the one to take that away from them. She had stolen a father from his children, a friend from the people who loved him, a legend from the world that needed him. And there was no erasing that. But the WSB had no patience for remorse. They did not tolerate hesitation. Jack Brennan made sure of that. From the moment Josslyn's body hit the ground, Josslyn had ceased to be a person in the eyes of the agency. She was no longer an individual with emotions, with ties to the past. She was a weapon, a tool to be wielded, a lethal asset that Brennan had painstakingly shaped to suit his needs. There was no sympathy in his gaze when he delivered her next assignment, no acknowledgement of the torment clawing at her from within. He simply handed her the details of her next target, as if nothing had happened. And in a way, nothing had happened, at least, not in the official records. Jason Morgan had been erased, wiped from existence with no trace left behind. Josslyn had carried out her mission with ruthless efficiency, ensuring that no one would ever connect his death to the WSB. The world would mourn him, but no one would know the truth. Except for Brennan. And except for her. Brennan was more than just a rogue agent, he was a kingmaker, a master manipulator who thrived in the shadows, pulling strings no one else could see. He had used Jason in the past, maneuvering him like a chess piece to serve his own agenda. He had forced Valentine into hiding, using Charlotte as leverage to ensure his compliance. And now, he had ensnared Josslyn, binding her to him with invisible chains that tightened with every mission she completed. She knew the truth. She understood the game he was playing. But that knowledge didn't change the reality of her situation. Because no one escaped the WSB. Not without consequences. Not without paying a price far greater than they could afford. And Josslyn knew, deep in the hollow pit of her soul, that her debt to them had only just begun. However, as Carly and Sunny inched closer to the truth, Josslyn could feel time slipping away like sand through her fingers. Every day, every moment, she knew the walls were closing in on her. She had covered her tracks flawlessly, erased every trace of her involvement in Jason's death, but deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced. Carly and Sunny were relentless, especially when it came to Jason. They would not stop until they had answers, and when they did, her entire world would collapse. Carly would never forgive her. The woman who had raised her, who had protected her, who had always been in her corner, would see her as nothing more than a traitor. Josslyn could already imagine the betrayal in Carly's eyes, the venom in her voice when she demanded to know why. There would be no justification strong enough, no explanation that could make this right. The moment Carly learned the truth, she would lose her mother forever. And Sunny. Sunny would hunt her. Jason had been his brother in everything but blood. A man he had trusted with his life. Jason had saved Sunny more times than anyone could count, had been by his side through every war, every loss, every victory. Sunny would not rest until he found the person responsible. He would tear Port Charles apart, break every rule, destroy anyone who stood in his way just to deliver justice for Jason. And if he discovered that it was her, the girl he had watched grow up, the one he had sworn to protect, there would be no mercy. But in the end, it wasn't Carly or Sunny that terrified her the most. It was herself. Because no matter how far she ran, no matter how well she hid, she could never escape the weight of what she had done. Every night, the same nightmare played in her mind, relentless and unchanging. She saw Jason standing there, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond his reach. She felt the rifle in her hands, the cold metal pressing against her skin, her finger hovering over the trigger. And then, his eyes. The moment before the bullet struck, before his body hit the ground. Those piercing blue eyes, locking onto hers through the scope. There had been no anger in them. No hatred. No accusations. Only disappointment. That was what haunted her. Not rage, not curses, not vengeance, just that quiet, unspoken disappointment. As if, even in his final moments, Jason had expected more from her. As if he had still believed she was better than this. And that was the part Josslyn could never forgive. She had killed a man who had done nothing but protect her family. A man who had always stood for loyalty and honor. A man she should have fought for, not executed in the dead of night. She had become the very thing she had once feared, the very kind of monster she had sworn she would never be. Carly and Sonny refused to stop. The deeper they dug, the closer they came to uncovering the truth Josslyn had fought so hard to bury. But the inevitable happened. The truth came crashing down. When Carly's eyes met hers, Josslyn felt the weight of her betrayal suffocate her. There was no anger at first, just raw, devastating heartbreak. Sonny's reaction was different, explosive, fueled by rage and betrayal. Jason had been his brother, and now, the girl he once protected had been the one to pull the trigger. Josslyn had no excuses, no justification that could undo what she had done. She saw it in their eyes, Carly's devastation, Sonny's fury. She had crossed a line she could never come back from. Now, she had only two choices: fight for what little remained of her soul or let the darkness consume her completely.